Hello and welcome to The Magic of with Paul Roffman, and my special guest today is an old friend of mine, Lee Warren. Now, Lee started off life as a magician. He didn't start off life as a magician. He was a magician at various points, and still enjoys a lot of magic. But he's a professional speaker, keynote speaker, works with businesses. In fact, I'm not going to tell you what Lee does. I'll let Lee tell you what Lee does. Hello, Lee.
Hi, Paul. Hello. The way from over the pond.
We now pretend we haven't done a sort of pre-hello, how are you? And now we do that Graham Norton-esque, oh, we've just met. I know nothing about you. Go on, tell me.
Well, yeah, so on my business card, if I had any business cards, which I don't, obviously as an environmentally conscious and enlightened human being, it would say keynote speaker and award-winning author. That would be the official job title. And my focus these days is on, well, it was until the virus, going to live events and walking on stages and talking to my audiences about sales and becoming more engaging and persuasive with their clients. They're my themes. Now, like everybody, I'm having to reinvent myself and be an expert online.
Does that are you still doing magic? Was that still part of your?
No, I made
wardrobe?
a very conscious decision in 2010. I knew I wanted to significantly change my life. So I've been doing close-up magic for a long time up to then. Well, largely close-up magic and some cabaret magic. About 20% of my work was cabaret magic and 80% was close-up magic. Just in case anyone listening doesn't know, so close-up magic is walking into events and walking up to people and fundamentally shouting at drunk people in the evening. That's the job of a close-up magician. And when in 2010, I was heading for 40, and excuse me.
No, stop
I knew
it.
I wanted to
Stop it. You're not 40.
I knew I want.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, well, I'm heading for 50 now. I knew I wanted a big change, so I made quite a conscious decision to stop doing magic officially and formally. It took about 3 years to wind the magic career down, actually. So I had a weird sort of 3 years where officially I'd stopped, but I still had lots of past clients who wanted me to, do the regular gigs for them. But in 2013, I did my last official paid-for proper magic gig. I've done very few since, where people I know really well or I've worked for a lot. So please come and do it. But for 7 years, I haven't officially done any magic.
So I probably met you at the very end of your magic career. I've kind of lost track of time. It's hard enough to work out.
We would have met around 2007, 2008, something like that, I think.
Yeah. That makes sense. I sort of magic around 2006. So it'd be probably through the Magic Circle, which you're still a member of.
Very, very much so. And I didn't fall out of love with magic. And I knew, in some ways, it wasn't the end of my magic career. It was sort of the peak of my magic career in many ways. I'd never had it easier to get gigs, and I can't say that I'm any good as a magician or whatever, but as good as I was ever going to be. I'd learned how to do the job. I'd learned how to turn up and entertain people and give good value and have people wanting to book me again. I'd learned all of that sort of stuff. And I knew if I didn't stop it then, if I kept going for another 10 years, I really wouldn't have enjoyed it anymore. So for me, it didn't feel like the end of my magic career. It felt like actually it was cresting, and that was the right time to leave. When
you were performing as a magician, were you doing other things as well, or were you full-on magician?
I was doing several other things. I trained as a teacher of something called Alexander Technique, and which I loved teaching. I loved learning, and I loved teaching. So I was doing a little bit of private practice teaching that, and I was also working in a few drama schools, working with trainee actors, which I loved. I really enjoyed it very much. And I wrote the libretto for an opera with my colleague Raymond Yu, which was about a magician. It was called The Original Chinese Conjurer, and It was about Chung Ling Soo, a very famous. He was an American actually, but he made his fame in Britain really, made his name in Britain. And so I was doing that in the mid 2000s. That took up quite a lot of 3 years of my life.
Witty and postmodern, I believe it's been acclaimed.
Oh, well remembered. Yeah. That was the Times review. Yes, it described me as a witty and postmodern lyricist. Yeah. It was great. It was huge. Great fun to work on.
And you're, a huge, musical theatre fan, predominantly Sondheim, I believe. Well, I know.
I'm a theatre fan. I'm a live performance fan.
You're a live performance fan. That thing that we used to do.
Oh, it's so heartbreaking, isn't it? It's heart. I mean, one of the things I mean, when we went into this crisis, I've always tried to live a life which is hope for the best but prepare for the worst. That's always been
right.
my mindset. I grew up in a very poor family. I know what it's like to have nothing. And I don't mean that in a schmaltzy way. I mean, I genuinely do. So there's always been a little bit of my personality, which is there at the back of my mind. I'm always going to go back to that, so I've always been prepared for that. So I always knew there was some crisis was coming. I didn't know whether it was going to be economic or cultural or a virus. And if you'd asked me to predict, I almost certainly wouldn't have said a virus. But I tried to be prepared for as many things as possible. And one of the sort of things I've had to adopt to really get me through this crisis is to without being artificial about it, but to really try and focus on opportunities rather than obstacles, because this has thrown up so many obstacles, and it would have been so easy to go into a pit of despair and to be honest, a pit of relying on other people, including the government, which is just not a long-term strategy for getting through your life. So even with live performance, I've tried to sort of see, and I've tried to help several friends, where are the opportunities? And they're clearly there are real obstacles, there are real problems. And I don't mean to downplay those because they're serious, but I suspect in the long run, although this is heartbreaking at the moment, we might look back and not necessarily think this is the best thing that ever happened, but every culture, every industry occasionally needs a massive shake-up. So I think there will be some really exciting and interesting things to come out of this eventually in terms of live performance or blended hybrid performances.
There's been a thing, I don't know if you've noticed it, and it may be controversial to say, but it's true, of specifically in the magical arena, where people now have been able to get online and perform as if they are supposed world-class performers, which is a little worrying, some of the stuff that's been touted out there, which I wonder if it's just because I see that stuff or that's a general...
Do you mean the quality is terrible?
Yeah. And yeah, and people who have no experience performing and selling themselves as performers when they're not. They're clearly not. You know how hard it is. I mean, it's funny. It's the old thing that you turn up to a gig and we charge a relatively high amount for a fee, and you turn up with a pack of cards, and some people are like, well, you just turn up with a pack of cards. You're here for 2 hours. You're earning a fortune. How, what do you actually do? You don't do anything. It's like, yeah. I think, this particular crisis we're all going through now, I mean, it's a great leveler in very many ways. And there are some things we all have in common, and there are some distinct differences. So the thing that everybody has in common, or one of the things, is all of us have a global multimedia production studio in our pockets, right? So everybody now has access to a global market and really some extraordinarily high quality production possibilities. I mean, anyone who's got a recent iPhone has got camera equipment. I'm not an expert, but I'm making this up. But probably better than you could have got 20 years ago, unless you were spending £50,000 and hiring a studio out. So in one way, that's a great leveler. It means new opportunities open up, and people can enter a market which perhaps
for whatever reason of inexperience or the way they look or just lack of context, they would have found very, very difficult previously. And I find, although inevitably and always you'll get some crappy performers and you'll get some people doing stuff that's not very good, well, that's all right, because that will eventually be winnowed out and people aren't going to pay for that for very long. And it's a funny thing. When usually over the long run, when we come across an inferior product or an inferior service, generally speaking, that if the service or the product is what people really need, it doesn't turn people off the whole idea of that product or service. It just turns them off that provider. Someone comes around and fixes your roof and does a really bad job. People don't say, "Oh my God, well, I'm never going to have a roof ever again." They just say, "We're not going to use that person again."
But I think they do that with magic to some degree. If you've not experienced a close-up magician and you've had a bad one, you are probably inclined not to hire a magician again.
That could be true. I mean, magic is an incredibly personal service. However, if we're honest with ourselves, most, and you can see this when you read professional theatre reviews, I think this is really revealing. Any show that features magic in it suddenly reveals how ignorant most theatre reviewers are about the art form they're reviewing, because most people do not know how to judge magic as a performance. They know how to judge their emotional reaction to performers.
Right.
And that's quite an important distinction, I think, for many of us as magicians or ex-magicians to make. So what I'm saying is, for example, and we all know this is true, you can take an average or even slightly less than averagely skilled magician, and if they look nice and they've had a shower and they can make people smile or make people intrigued, well, most audience will say that's a great magician. Because what they're saying is, I had a positive emotional reaction. Mm-hmm. We were so glad they were at our event. You could take someone who's phenomenally skilled, technically, and we all know these people who, I would not let any of these people anywhere near my friends or family. I just wouldn't. I don't care how good they are at card tricks.
Yeah.
So on a magical level, most of us are not terribly good at judging magic, and I think that also translates to the online world, with the difference that all of us, and I'm much more focused on professional speaking than I am on magic, but I think the argument is the same. All of us are having to relearn our craft right from the ground up, because nobody has done this before. Before March 2020, nobody had been an online performer in a world where their audience was sitting alone or in very small groups, also watching the performance through a dodgy Wi-Fi signal and whatever laptop they've managed to drag out of the back of a cupboard. And literally nobody knows how to do this. Nobody knows how to make this work. And that's why I say it's a great leveler. What I've seen is a lot of live performers effectively try to recreate a live performance, and it's a disaster. It's a car crash, because this is some weird medium between a TV show and a radio on in the background. Right? We're in some weird sort of mental space, and most of our audiences, I mean, people online have the attention span of a 3-year-old and the memory of a 90-year-old. Right? And so we're sort of in some ways competing with that. So much of the work, for example, that magicians now have to do is before the performance even begins. And I think a lot of magicians haven't embraced this in any way. You've got to create this state where by the time people fire up the laptop and watch your performance online, by that time, they've got to be 100% engaged and excited and ready to go. So performers are going to have to become masters and mistresses of digital design, and how to write invitations, and what to send people in advance, and how to do some pre-show stuff that nobody even knows they've done sneakily, and so that everyone is tingling with anticipation, rather than just what we used to do, which is turn up and just make it, bluff our way through it after we'd walked through the door.
I think the problem is a lot of the online stuff, you're better off watching the David Blaine special.
I think in terms of production, that may be true. And in terms of how you design and edit and cut a TV show, that may be true. However, there are many things you can do online that a David Blaine special still can't do. And much of that, of course, is around making things personal, making things topical. I'm making this up on the spur of the moment, and I'm not even sure if this could be done, but actually it could be done. But imagine if this was a magic show now, and as a magician I said to you, Paul, reach behind you to any book on that bookshelf, and off we go down a wonderful world of telling you what word you're looking at in a book behind you on your bookshelf.
Yeah.
And actually, it's just occurred to me, actually, you could do that, and you could do that extraordinarily well. So, a David Blaine TV special can't do that, for example. So I think, and I don't think we're there yet, but I think the pressure of this crisis will create some extraordinary creativity, and it'll be rather special. The problem, the one problem in the magic community, assuming people listening to this are magicians or know that community, is it's like many creative industries in that it's much easier to copy what someone else has done than to create your own stuff from scratch for many people. So we'll probably see the pressure much more of having to create magic tricks, and then they'll exist for 3 months, and then suddenly everybody who's got a Wi-Fi connection will have seen that trick. So another one has to be.
That's happening. We're all doing it. I mean, there's been a trick, a mind-reading trick, which is definitely doing the rounds. Which is fantastic. It's fantastic. It actually,
I think I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a ESP type trick. And it's brilliant. It is brilliant. There's no question about it. So a lot of people are doing it. And I myself have been playing around with it, but I haven't really got into the Zoom shows, but I'm thinking long-term rather than short-term. And it reminds me, which brings us kind of neatly onto your book, because you've written a book.
You've got it there, bless you.
I've got the book here.
You mean my award-winning best-selling book?
That's it. The award-winning and best-selling book, which was witty and is witty and postmodern, of course. And it's called The Busy Person's Guide to Great Presenting. Become a compelling, confident presenter every time, Lee Warren. Now, I've been dipping into this again, and there's a lot of stuff in here that's super relevant for magicians, but for performers in general. And it's aimed at business. It's aimed at people who are not adept at speaking to their company, perhaps, or as you talk about the PowerPoint, the dreaded PowerPoint presentation. But there's so many things that I think a lot of magicians would find very useful. It's very clear. I should have underlined the things that I was going to talk about, but the question, actually, that was it. The asking the audience a question thing, and I want to circle back to what we were talking about with the magic as well, and this live performance. So we'll try and come back to that. But I think in your book, one of the things that really hit me was asking the audience a question where they have to think about themselves. And they have to ask themselves a question. And it's such a great conceit. It's such a great way of engaging with an audience. And I did a show here at the H Club LA, which I believe is no longer.
Oh, it's not. No, breaks my heart.
Yeah. I did a stage, my stage show there, and one of the opening gambits in the show was me talking about going to the theatre, and I had these little postcards with photocopies of actual programs. My collection of actual programs, I made them into little flyers. And so I would talk about how lucky I was when I was a kid. I went to Westminster School, and I used to go to plays and art galleries, and it was amazing, and blah, blah, blah. And I was actually talking to Steve Valentine, who's a fantastic actor and magician, English, who lives out here, actually has moved to Canada. But he talked about that very thing that you were talking about, which was throwing a question at the audience early on, and engagement, and how to engage them. And so instead of saying, me, I said, I went to the school and I did this, but Can you think of someone who influenced or inspired you as a youngster? We're all creative people here, so was there an actor that you saw that you think of that made you want to be an actor? Is there a musician that made you want to be a musician? Is there a teacher who got you hooked? Can you remember them? As soon as you say that to the audience, you literally watch them all go,
"Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh yes, Mr. David, Mr. Smith,
Yeah.
And that really resonated with me where you said that.
Well, it's great. I'm glad you spotted it. Yes, it's a lovely. It's both a lovely technique and a way of thinking. And what sort of lies at the heart of it is the fact that audiences can, they can argue with you, they can disagree with you, but they can't argue with their own experience. And if you get audiences engaged with their own experience, you're much more often onto a winner. I think, and many people think of performing as a form of showing off or a form of being the center of attention, and it's always been fairly clear to me that actually performing is quite the opposite. And perhaps it's because I write as much as perform, or at least my focus is on writing as much as performing. And really, I think the job of great performance is to help the audience reflect themselves back at themselves. And when you leave it's one of the reasons why Darren Brown is so phenomenal, because I imagine deliberately, but even if it's not deliberately, it's still wonderful. One of the great skills he has is to get an audience to see their own world in a slightly different way. Now, that may or may not be true. It doesn't matter. It's an art form. It's a conceit. And also to make audiences feel like they're slightly more intelligent than they were. Feel more intelligent at the end of one of his shows than at the beginning of one of his shows. People walk out thinking, "Oh, I've learned something," or "I was clever. I was one step ahead of him. I feel better about myself." Whereas a poor performer, it will be 30 minutes of "Look at me and look at what I bought in a magic shop yesterday, and look at this bright red silk, and look what I can do with it, and look at me here with a bird." And it doesn't affect people. It doesn't change people. It doesn't. And that performance not interesting or referable or memorable in any way.
But there's also understanding the narrative.
Yes, although I think narrative is only one tool at a performer's disposal. And in fact, one of the great lessons of 20... I've got a real bee in my bonnet, by the way. I did an interview with Charlie Burgess of the Magic Circular, the house magazine for the Magic Circle. He
wrote for quite a few newspapers, Charlie.
And Charlie was managing editor of a national newspaper, and very bright. Anyway, we had a lovely conversation, but I said to him, I've got a bit of a bugbear that I think particularly magicians, possibly more than any other form of artists, don't look often enough outside our own art form for inspiration.
Absolutely.
And one of the great lessons of 20th century, certainly in terms of fiction and in terms of theatre, is that you can break traditional narrative up. You can dispense with narrative, and that can be very exciting and very thought-provoking. And it's one of the great, all of modernism and certainly postmodernism is about shattering traditional narratives. And some performers have done that sensationally well.
But it still has it still is narrative, whether you're flipping it, you're changing, you're breaking it. Darren's a perfect example. His coin in hand routine. For me, Darren Brown does a thing, for those who don't know, where he borrows a pound coin or a banknote. The person's on stage, they put it in either hand, they put their hands out, and he tells them which hand it's in. That's an engaging and wonderful piece of theatre. And it's really which hand is the coin in, which hand, that's it. So I think if you can make that, it shows it's not about the trick.
Yeah.
Yes. It's about the theatre. It comes back to what you said. You're a theatre lover.
Well, I think in that instance, for example, I think his great insight, or one of his many great insights, is that actually there's one narrative there which is dreary and predictable. And perhaps this is what I'm talking about. So in film terms, this would be boy meets girl, they fall in love, they have an argument, they get back together again, right? That's like the most dreary, predictable form of storytelling. And in this example, you put a coin in one hand, I'll tell you which hand it's in. That's the equivalent. It's dreary and predictable. Mm-hmm. What a great filmmaker will do, or what a great theatre writer will do with that boy meets girl story, is they might stick to that framework, but they'll introduce all sorts of other elements, or they might shake it up a bit, or they might make a twist at some point. And Darren's great insight into that trick was actually it's no one really cares about the outcome. They don't care that the magician can say it's in that hand. What they care about is how you're going about that process. And so actually the narrative is, I know so much about human beings that you're going to tell me things about yourself. There are things moving under the surface within you that you don't even understand yourself, but I'm able to see and interpret those things.
Yeah.
And the consequence of that is that I can tell you which hand you're holding a coin in. But it's not about that. It's about all this stuff that apparently is going on under the brain and under the body. And that's what audiences are fascinated by.
And you take it further with his question and answer routines, and you build that idea even wider and bigger, and it's about more things, and there's more things to look at, there's more things to pull on. So I think that's.
In another way, and in a much sort of when you think of David Copperfield at his greatest, there's things like vanishing the Statue of Liberty. That's not. The narrative there isn't, look at me, I can make a giant lump of rock disappear from your vision. The narrative there is, I can take the greatest testament to liberty in this mighty nation, and I can do something with it that if this were really true, would be utterly terrifying to your sense of self. But if you'll join me in a moment, we'll just go to this cliff edge of what might be possible, and then I'll bring you back and you're safe in the arms of Uncle David. There's that real emotional narrative going on.
And you talk about it in one of the chapters here, where you talk about 3/3 and you talk about signposting. And if you only remember 3 things from my presentation today, those 3 things will be, because you're looking at what I think people will find very enlightening in this book, businesses specifically, and people who have to speak at businesses, is where is the focus of the speaker? And you talk about, we kind of touched on it, bringing it back to the audience, but also these people get caught up. There was a fellow you were talking about, had a 45-minute, he was worried about his 45-minute speech and how much stuff he'd have to put in it and what he'd have to say, and he wasn't thinking about his audience, and he wasn't thinking about the simplicity again.
Yeah, absolutely. Audiences, we're quite simple things, human beings. We like bright lights and fast-moving colours, and we like things that make us laugh and things that make us cry. We're quite simple. We don't like having to do a lot of work mentally. We really don't like it. And this is why. The traditional PowerPoint presentation can be so tedious. It's not the fact necessarily that the information is so boring. It's the fact that we're being asked to hold lots of stuff in our mind and the presenter isn't making sense of it for us. Whereas what a great communicator, let's take it outside of just business, but what a great communicator will do is they're saying to their audience, it's fine, I've done all the work for you. I've done all the thinking in advance for you. Just join me on this lovely journey and you'll be better off in 45 minutes than you are now. You'll either know more, or you'll understand more, or you'll feel differently. And I think this applies to magicians, it applies to mentalists, it applies to business presenters. And one of the best ways of doing that is to exactly this, to signpost where you're going. And the reason I wrote the book, and the reason it's called The Busy Person's Guide to Great Presenting, is that I wrote it specifically for people who have to present. They have no option. And they're not necessarily talented at it or don't necessarily enjoy it, but have to do it and have to do it, become good at it quickly. And signposting is one of the easiest, quickest things you can do to improve your communicating. And again, when you watch a great performer, if you think of magicians or mentalists or whatever, you'll see almost without exception, there's a real flow to the whole performance. And it ends in a different place to where it began. And that different place is superior in some way. It's watch a great comedian and they'll do this. Watch a great juggler and they'll do this. Whereas a poor performer, it's just a string of here's one thing, and here's another thing, and here's a third thing, and here's a fourth thing, and here's the last thing. Right, and there's no link there. There's no bill, and there's sort of no reason for the audience to follow it. If they go out to the restroom and come back 20 minutes later, nothing's significantly different. Mm-hmm. Whereas in a great presentation or a great performance, audiences should feel like, I cannot. If I go to the restroom, I'll miss something, and when I come back in, I'll have missed something important.
Yeah, takes us back to this idea of development and change. So where did the business training come in? Where did that appear from? I mean, let's go further back. Where are you from?
Originally, I was born on the south coast of England in a town called Poole, right on the south coast, second largest natural harbour in the world.
I think I've been sailing there when I was a kid.
Beautiful place.
School.
Beautiful place. Everyone should grow up near the sea.
But you ran away to London.
I did, yeah. I went to I went to train as an actor in London a long time ago, 30 years ago nearly.
Where was that?
By the end of that was at ALRA, the Academy of Live and Recorded Arts, mm-hmm. Which had. I'm very grateful for many. I mean, I realized by the end of my training that acting was not for me. I enjoyed being on stage. I just the whole career and anyway,
not being paid.
It was not. Well, partly not being paid, but not that so much actually. There were two big. I don't know how interesting this is to anybody else, but there were two big insights I was sort of forced on me fairly soon after qualifying from drama school. And one was there were three big insights. One was it was an industry where only about a few dozen people were ever going to dominate that industry. There wasn't even at the level of theatre, not just films where there's only about 20 people. They're just, and of the hundreds of thousands of people every year entering the business, there were only going to be about 30, 40 people in the planet dominating this industry. So the chances of that working were vanishingly small. The other insight I had was that there's no, or I felt there's no career in it. And what I mean by that is a friend of mine did just under the lead role at the National Theatre in a play in 1991. A big deal, right? Working with a famous director and a big role at the National Theatre, the UK's National Theatre. And then didn't have another job for 2 years. And after about 2 years was then doing something in a tiny pub theatre somewhere for £30 a week or something. And I remember that really affected me because I remember thinking that there is no career. It's not like, you do your groundwork for a year and then the next year it's a bit better and then the next year, and then finally you're a film star. It just was not in any way that kind of career. And then the third insight that was forced on me after having done loads of auditions was that most of my career would always be in the hands of other people. And people who were sort of often fickle and venal and not bad people, but just for the pressures of the industry. And I just didn't want to spend my life walking into audition rooms and constantly feeling like I was being judged by other people.
Yeah.
So I admire people who do it. I admire people, and I love watching great performers. But I'm much more interested in writing than I am in the actual acting these days.
And writing what?
Oh, sorry. I mean, listen. I mean, seeing the right. When I go to a theatre show,
right. Seeing the right.
I sit there. I'm perfectly happy watching a show that's not very well acted if the writing is brilliant, because I'm much more. It's a bit like going to the ballet. I can't. I mean, I just don't get ballet really. But I'm perfectly happy to sit there with my eyes closed, listening to the music because I love music. I deeply love music. People moving about from one side of the stage for 2 hours for no apparent reason. I don't get it, but. But the music, I love it. So often theatre for me is a bit like that, actually. When there's a thrilling performer or series of performers, there's no magic like it. But often you go to theatre and the acting will be fine, it'll be okay. So I'm quite happy sitting there, sort of taking on board the writing. I think, oh gosh, that's really wonderful how the writer has done that, how they've got that character there. And theatre is so exciting, and again, it's one of the things I'm always amazed more magicians don't pick up on it, really, because what you can do with theatre writing. And when I first started writing for theatre, I found it so thrilling that you can write a stage direction which seems like nothing. Like, for example, somebody appears, stage left and stops. But the impact of that to an audience can be just extraordinary. You can have two people talking at the front of a stage, talking absolute rubbish, and just by making a third person walk on and do nothing, you create this whole physical, psychological thing that's absolutely riveting for audiences. And so I'm often, it doesn't matter for me whether that person walking on is a good actor or not. What matters is all the writer's chosen to do that at exactly this moment in somebody else's conversation. And that can be, really fabulous. And
there's the layering. It brings us back to why, as you said, why don't more magicians look at other arts or other things outside, or sciences or anything outside of the trick? And, when you see a great play or a great film, the layering, it's those moments where, yes, it's the writing, and then you've got the layering of the actor who brings something else to the writing, and then perhaps that improvised moment that nobody thought of that just happened because somebody was listening. And actually, the common thread through all of this actually would be listening, the ability to listen to what's happening and respond to your environment, which is superbly important as a magician performing. And it's very akin to, well, for me anyway, as a close-up magician, or certainly what I've been doing when I was at the Magic Castle here, a formalized close-up show, which is scripted to a degree. I know where I'm going, but I'm out there improvising with whatever's in front of me. And I suppose that's more akin to a stand-up show, comedy, and I will riff off people, but I know the journey that I'm going on. So it allows, for theatre, which ultimately I think of that as theatre, even though it's a magic show, because that's where my brain goes to. As theatre, that's what makes theatre so exciting, because it should never be the same, because it can't be the same, because it's in the moment. And so, so the writing is there, but it's never the same, because I'm just if I'm listening and reacting to you, then it's never the same. If I'm just, if I'm just phoning the act in, and it's the 8th performance of the week, and it's a matinee on a Saturday, it's possible that happens, but hopefully it doesn't.
Yeah, of course. In a perfect world, you want all of them. I suppose sort of what I'm getting at is particularly for many performers in the magic world, I think because their cultural ambit can be quite limited, they often reach for perhaps sort of the easiest things to adopt from theatre. And one of those things is this word narrative. And what I've seen that do for many performers, many magicians and mentalists, is I've seen it limit their performances, because what it turns into, I've just got to find a story, and then I'll sort of crowbar this magic trick or this mentalist effect into this story, and that will somehow make this more interesting because it's a story, and I've been told that stories are interesting. And actually, quite often what I've seen, perhaps it's counterintuitive, is quite often the opposite, where the audience is thinking, could you just get to the bit where the smoke appears out of the box, or where you finally tell that person what word he's thinking of, because this story about your granddad and how he was affected during the war, and you finally come up with this amazing spoon. Just make the spoon bend. Don't tell us how you found the spoon. And so I think a lot of performers sort of they're not quite tuned into how an audience is emotionally engaging with this stuff. I went to see what's his name, a young playwright who just has taken the world by storm. Florian Zeller, I think his name is, French writer. Anyway, he's written a series of things, some of which have been made into films, called There's one, The Father, The Son, The Wife, Truth. Have you come across his writing?
No. Florian Zeller.
The Wife was, I think it's Florian Zeller, I think his name is. The Wife was made into a film with Glenn Close and English actor who was in Brazil, played a pope recently.
Jonathan Pryce.
Jonathan Pryce.
I'll get
and brilliant film.
my producer to check that for me, will you? Yeah, thanks, Jim. See, he's just going to Google. Get me a coffee. No, I'll get the wine. Oh no, damn! It's just me still. Okay, no, sorry. Carry on.
This I always pour my gin and tonic into something that looks like a mug of tea.
Yeah.
Oh, you've got your wine. Bless your heart.
Yeah, I thought. Well, it is midnight here, so I'll have a.
Is that a lovely little Californian Zinfandel rosé you've got there?
It is, but it's French. I don't drink that Californian mug.
Anyway, he wrote a play called The Father, which I went to see, and did something that, in terms of narrative, this is where narrative can be extraordinary. And he did something which I didn't think theatre could do, which is change the perspective of the audience. I thought only film could do that. I didn't realise theatre could do this. Because for me, theatre can tell you stuff about plot a bit, but don't really tell you about character. Theatre is very character-driven. And perhaps only novels do character better than theatre does. Anyway, in this play called The Father, the conceit is, it starts off and there's a father on his own and he's sitting in what's his apartment in Paris, and his daughter comes in to help him. And we clearly get the idea the father is a little bit, he's possibly got dementia or is getting dementia. And there's just a few moments where she says, oh, where did you put so-and-so, Dad? And he says, oh, I thought I put it in the cupboard in the kitchen. And she says, no, you didn't. And it all gets a bit tetchy. And you sort of start thinking, oh, poor daughter, she's having to put up with this for her father. And is this going to go on for years? And what's this all about? Or is he fine? And is she just a bit annoying? You don't quite know as an audience where you are. Anyway, this goes on for some time, and it pushes you to the point where you sort of start thinking, where's this going? How's this going to carry on for another hour and a half of theatre? Anyway, she says goodbye to him and she leaves. And there's a sort of pause in this play, and then suddenly some totally other woman suddenly walks out of the kitchen and says, who were you talking to, Dad? And he says, I was talking to Isabel, whoever. And she said, well, who on earth's that? And you suddenly, as an audience, your whole perspective on this man and the last 20 minutes of what you just saw suddenly shifts. And then you get into this thing of, okay, are we seeing someone who's actually got dementia and he just invented a daughter? No. Has he got dementia and the person who just left is his real daughter? And this other person is some evil chancer trying to twist his reality? And then as this goes on, you suddenly start realizing, oh, I thought there was a painting on the wall behind him and that appears to have gone. And then we open on another scene and wasn't there a chair over there? And slowly throughout the play, all the stuff in his apartment disappears and you never know when it's going to disappear. And it's so destabilizing and slightly terrifying because you suddenly start thinking, is this what dementia is like? Is this what it's like? You just don't know what's real. You just don't know where you are anymore. And it's just riveting. And I've rarely spent an evening in a theatre like it, actually. And I remember watching this thinking, this is what good magicians could be doing. Audiences literally on the edge of their seats thinking, I thought this, but actually it's that. Or no, it's not that anymore. It's this instead.
And that's, so that, but I think many, the word education is a dangerous word in today's political furnace, but it's the self-education perhaps, or the ability to look at things differently. And it's when you talk about sort of crowbarring the narrative or the tricks into the narrative, I think the problem arises from a lack of authenticity and the lack of the self-awareness to be able to tell your story that's interesting. So ultimately, if you know yourself, it's the know thyself thing, you can communicate something that's you're passionate about, and therefore it makes sense to the magic, or it makes sense to the film or the story or the engagement because it's relevant to you, and therefore it's the correct thing to say. You're saying the right thing because how can you not say that? It's you. So you're totally engaged, and you should be. Therefore, you are hopefully engaging if you're a performer, if you know how to perform, and that's where you went to drama school. Or I went to drama school. There are techniques, there are things that you learn, and perhaps you need you need it within you to start with to a large degree. And I think there's a lot that I think magic kind of starts backwards, because I'm not sure it's the need to perform that makes you a magician. Whereas I think actors, there's more of a need to perform.
I
mean, we're talking in
really...
sweeping generalizations, I suppose, but yeah, it's an interesting area. Yeah.
I suppose when you watch a great performer, perhaps for me anyway, you sort of get the sense that they could probably have turned that talent to anything and it would have been great. So, I mean, a very famous, and perhaps this dates me a bit, but a famous example is something like Andre Previn, who was so brilliant at doing comedy with Morecambe and Wise. And why was that? Well, he wasn't just a great, and also, he was a brilliant pianist, but also a great conductor and a pretty decent composer and a fabulous jazz pianist as well as classical pianist. And he could also do comedy. And why was that? Not that he'd done a lot of comedy, but he understood audiences and he understood, rhythm and ebb and flow. And so I suppose if you've got that kind of talent, that kind of mind, you can adapt. Oh, I'm used to conducting music to get a response from an audience, and so doing comedy is probably quite similar. I'm guessing. I'm just making it up.
And I think magicians forget as well. There can be silent acts which are just music, and they're full of narrative. They're full of storytelling. They're full of personal stories, personal points of view. And it comes back, even in improvisation, doing Groundlings or any improv is about having a strong point of view. If you're going to come on as a character, if you come on with a point of view and an emotion, we engage with that, whether it's good or bad. Trump has a point of view. He's engaging, mad but engaging, in an insane way. But he's like a stand-up comedian. Actually, I was watching a clip,
very much so,
a clip yesterday, and it's incredible. But I don't want to go that way. But drifted off into that one there. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking in terms of silent acts. I mean, well, you'll remember him from Magic Nights in Soho, but Michael Vidini, who's one of my favourite magicians, and it's just sort of a mystery to me why he isn't better known and why he isn't just booked all the time on big shows. Because I mean, that's sort of almost as close to a perfect 20 minutes of silent magic, I think, as I've ever seen. And there's this wonderful mixture of that quirky presence that he has and beautifully executed magic. Again, all of which engages an audience, all of which almost all of it uses. In fact, I think for every trick he does, he uses an audience member, with the possibility. He does the water bowls, which doesn't use anyone from the audience. But I think everything else, I think he gets someone up, silently to help him, which is almost automatically engaging for an audience.
Yeah, and you can't understand a word he's saying normally, so he's got to do something.
No, it's true. You can't book him by telephone.
Like, Michael, there's a gig. Who is it? Oh, hello. Okay. I can still do French people, can't I? That's all right. You can do French characters.
Yeah, didn't do accents. Missed that term. Missed that term at drama school. Yeah.
You're right. So you came from Paul, came to London. You love London. I mean, Soho is your muse.
I sleep in my flat and I live in Soho.
Yeah, we've had many a drink, many a meal, all sorts of things there, and I think things are coming back. And from a positive, I don't know. It's such a mixed message. We're getting a very mixed message. It's very interesting seeing what's going on in LA and seeing what's going on in London. And I found it really interesting when we talked about the whole social distancing thing, that in LA it's 6 feet and in London it's 2 meters. But 2 meters is 1.84 feet or something.
I don't know.
So that obviously it doesn't travel as far in the UK. No, here. It doesn't travel as far. And then now it's 1 meter, but it's not really 1 meter. But it's better if it's 2 meters, but it's 1 meter. But if it can be 2 meters, it's better. And yet nobody's wearing a mask in London, which I find really interesting. Whether it works or it doesn't work, I don't know. But it seems to be.
Oh no, it's mandated now, and if you, I mean, there are two things, aren't there, that sort of change people: law and culture. And I think they have to work side by side. Law normally follows culture. You know, in most states, you'll find that laws change about 20 years after. I made that up. You know, years after the culture has changed. Whereas here, we're sort of trying to do things the opposite way around for speed, which is making things the law and then hoping that culturally people will change. And so it's been mandated. At public transport, you have to wear masks. And I think it'll sort of possibly, assuming we have to live with this and learn to live with the risks of this, which I think is the most likely outcome, barring a miracle like a vaccine or a cure. And I think it'll be a bit like, I mean, when I first moved to London, and you will probably remember this as well, everybody had a copy of what was called the A to Z on them. And do you remember the A to Z?
Of course.
So the A to Z, in case people listening don't know, the A to Z was a mini atlas. It was a little book, usually ring bound, and it had every street in London in it. And nobody ever left their house or their flat without a copy of the A to Z on them. Everybody had an A to Z. And it was totally normal, just if you had happened to forget yours, to say to somebody, "Oh, can I look in your A to Z really quickly?" And Londoners were phenomenal at knowing which page of the A to Z things were on. You'd often say to people, "I've got to get so and so," and they'd say, "It's on page 84," and that was just culturally that was a thing. And I think now it's going to become, people are going to, it's culturally, you just take a mask with you. You just take a mask, and we're probably going to find people taking a spare mask just in case. Yeah. Like wearing a tie to a private club.
But people, it seems that in the UK they're not, because it's mandated on public transport, but in LA it's mandated in public. So,
oh, really? I didn't know that.
So
right.
when you go out, you have to wear a mask. Now, we're taking them on and off, and blah blah blah. And the whole point is you're stopping the spread if you are. If you have it, if you are asymptomatic or you have it, you're not coughing it onto somebody else, and then they're protected if you are, etc. So I'm not seeing that happening in London. I'm seeing the 1 meter rule now being put into play, and it seems to me it was only ever, the lockdown was only ever really ultimately getting people ready, or getting the health services ready to be able to deal with a real problem that they didn't have the facilities to deal with. And it seems that they've done that pretty much, well, here and there, that they can cope with people coming in. The numbers are going up in the US, but the deaths have been going down. So I don't know what that means. Is it less virulent? The papers are filled with, this could happen. Every single day, everything is, this could happen. This could be the new normal. And of course, there is no new normal, because every day is a new normal, which I hate.
A trick I learned years ago. I mean, talking about viruses is outside of my my skill set or my expertise, but and I'm only interested in it in two ways. One is obviously how it personally affects me and my family and loved ones and friends and so on, and the second is how it affects my business and the business of my clients. They're the only two areas in which excuse me, I'm going to sneeze, and I always sneeze in twos, by the way. But in terms of, hang on, that's really, that feeling. It's really annoying, isn't it? You're about to sneeze.
Don't sneeze, and then you I can't.
But you said something about newspapers. So, yeah, a trick I learned years ago in terms of, I've always been interested in how to think clearly and how to sort of try and not devote too much mental energy to stuff either I can't change or that's just going to drag me down. And one of the tricks I learned years ago was to always read newspaper articles from the bottom up, to read the last paragraph first.
Right.
And more than half the time, and I'm not making this up, more than half the time, particularly the more shocking the headline is, the more likely it is that the last paragraph of the article will say, well, this hasn't happened yet, but if it did happen, it would be terrible.
Yeah.
Right? And then the paragraph above that usually says, however, equal expert Dr. John Smith says, I don't agree with this because ... And it's really funny. Once you've read the last paragraph that says this hasn't happened, and then you've read the opposing expert saying, I don't think this is true. If you then go back and read the rest of the article, you just read it for what it is, which is a journalist waking up a bit hungover and late, going onto Twitter looking for we've had people going absolutely bonkers in this country because apparently, the entire country is going to tear down every single statue to the past. And following on from the American seeming craze for this. And actually, when you read the stories in the reverse order, it's almost every single story ends up with no one's actually officially calling for this. No one's actually gone out and done it. Somebody who's totally mad on Twitter tweeted something saying, we should tear down the statue of Paddington Bear because it would be fun. Ha, ha, ha. And that turns into a headline the following day saying, now campaigners want to take down Paddington Bear. Never happened, never was going to happen.
Well, of course, there's no nuance. There's no nuance on Twitter, and there's virtually no nuance in social media. And most of these people, if you actually talk to them face to face, you have a completely different discussion, or they're not able to discuss because they can only speak in however many letters Twitter allows. Because they can't actually form an argument. And that goes, I'm talking both sides, and here it goes so far left, it goes so far right, it's, anything you say can be used against you. Forever.
Yes, can and will be used.
Forever.
Can and will be.
In and out of context.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's one of the reasons why I'm so keen on face-to-face communication, personal communication, because I have, friends and loved ones who occupy very, very different parts of the political spectrum to me. And when we talk about it personally, it's a totally different conversation to online. And I think one of the reasons is, in order to have a discussion about something where the discussion goes like this, you put your point without interruption. I then read your point and put my point without interruption. And we then continue doing that. It's profoundly different to you make your point and you're constantly assessing and readjusting your point based on how I'm looking, how I'm reacting, whether I look bored, whether I look angry, whether I look intrigued. And this is how we've been communicating for, I don't know how long Homo sapiens have been around, but a couple of 100,000 years probably. And in general, millions of years. And we've suddenly taken that and shoved it into a form of communication that none of us really are very good at. And in order to be good at it, you've got to formulate ideas really clearly in your own mind. And you've then got to be able to translate those ideas perfectly and unchanged into crystal clear prose that nobody can misinterpret, that nobody can exaggerate. And that then prose has to be read with the best of intentions by people giving you the fairest possible judgment, giving you all the benefit of the doubt. And they've then got to be able to respond by making ideas crystal clear in their minds and churning out absolutely clear prose that you've then got to read. It's never going to happen. It's just
people spend their time virtually writing their postgraduate thesis on social media. The amount of time it takes... it's just like, I'm going to go and write a book somewhere. This is pointless exercise. It's
an award-winning international best-selling book I would recommend.
I would recommend the Busy Person's Guide to Great Presenting, which is available on Amazon and all good bookstores if they still exist.
And most crap ones.
But that, it's really about nuance. And then that brings us back to, what you and I do and what you do specifically. You're about nuance, you're about language, you're about communication. And working with businesses, and what you talk about in your book is how to have a clear message, is how to engage an audience. And that is not, here's my prose, shut up and listen. It's very much, you walk onto a stage. What do people think of you? What are you wearing? What do you look like? Who is he? How tall is he? Oh, he's got a beard. How is his hair? Oh, look at that suit. Oh, he's speaking. Oh, he's got an accent. Oh, he's posh. Oh, all these thoughts are going through an audience's mind. And so you have to hone it into this ball, into this position. And you do that vocally, you do that physically. Being grounded does that. And your message and the clarity of what you have to say. And we worked together. We did a marketing for magicians, which was a fantastic... it was a weekend we did? I think it was a weekend.
Well, it was over 3 months.
It was over 3 months.
2 days over 3 months, yeah.
Glad
it felt like a weekend.
Felt like a weekend. We were locked up for 3 months together. It was a preparation for COVID-19. But yeah, and it very much dealt with that. And we looked at marketing, and we looked at a lot of the side that actually it is interesting, but it's funny as a performer. I don't know if you find this. The technical side, I like the toys and I like the gadgets, but I don't want to be a film editor. I don't want to be an audio engineer. I don't want to be a lighting guy. I don't want, and there's a need to do that, but I certainly appreciate all these other facets that, and that kind of brings us back to this idea of when we were talking about your internet Zoom show versus a TV show. You realize why a TV show works, why it's good, why you want to watch it. It's, there is a limit to doing this by yourself. It gets better if I have someone else in with me.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The whole thing changes, and we are clearly already moving toward the end of lockdown. So this idea of just this Zoom show ethic, or yes, we're learning a lot, and hopefully, I think the best lesson is to take it forward and think, okay, how can I develop this? How can I take it to the next thing? You talked about the Jeff Bezos example. Well, there was two things actually. I'm conflating. In your book, you talk about Jeff Bezos, how you're thought about by people, but that's a separate thought that just jumped into my brain. But
your personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Yes, your personal brand is what people say when you're not in the room, which I thought that's an interesting one with Jeff Bezos, because I don't think it's very nice what people say about him quite often now.
Depends who you are.
Yeah,
I think.
But what was the other thing that was? The 10 years, the product that was doing hugely well and then disappeared from all the shops and literally plummeted. And it took them 10 years to get back on track with it, which was the CD.
Oh, yeah, the music industry. Yeah. Just, I suppose a really cliched example of that is Kodak, of course, who just didn't see it coming, just didn't see this digital change coming. But I've been speaking to a lot of event producers recently. I mean, my market is events. The world I move in is events. And generally speaking, what I'm seeing, and this is just anecdotal, it's not scientific yet, but I'm seeing a lot of, one of my clients put it really well. She said, I may never have to print a name badge ever again. Right? So actually, very quickly after lockdown, I think a lot of canny event people started doing that thing I mentioned earlier of hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. I think many people now have embraced the possibilities of online stuff. And while it may never be quite as satisfactory as getting people all together in a room, there are all sorts of benefits to being online. I mean, costs are so much lower. It's so much easier to organize things. In my world of keynote speaking previously, if you wanted to put on an event, the kind of business conference, it would be a minimum of 6 months to organize even a basic level, getting 50 people into a room in a hotel somewhere. Minimum 6 months to organize that. For a proper big event, 2 years probably. Whereas now, if I've got let's say a pharmaceutical client or a financial services client, the government could announce some legislation today, and that company within a fortnight could have organized a conference online, getting together some of the best thinkers in their industry and get them together for 2 hours they could organize that really quickly now. So I think the event industry is starting to really embrace the possibilities of virtual, and so I don't think we're going to come back from that. I think we'll see lots of what will be called sort of blended or hybrid events. I think that will happen a lot. I mean, my market is the corporate market more. I know that more than anything else. Of course, for some kinds of performers, there'll be a return to family barbecues and small weddings and that kind of thing. And that's not my world. That seems to me a lot of work for not very much money, to be honest. And so, I would only want to do that if I absolutely loved performing at those kinds of events. And some people do. So they'll, good luck to them. That market will come back a bit. Large corporate things. I mean, Facebook and Microsoft announced more than 2 months ago nearly, that they put a hold on all live events until at least July 2021. Mm-hmm. I can't see corporations taking the risk of litigation over apparently forcing people to be at a conference when they could just as easily have got a similar amount of benefit from being at home. But I could easily see, for instance, so one of the problems events people have to face is sponsorship. If you're putting on let's say you're putting on a 3-day conference about sanitation, I don't know. Traditionally you'd have to get sponsors for that, and you'd get people in the exhibition hall helping you to pay your costs. And the initial terror when we went into lockdown was, oh my God, how do we get any sponsorship for virtual events? Well, what they realized incredibly quickly was it's probably going to be easier to get sponsorship for virtual events, because the sponsors themselves aren't going to have to pay the costs of sending salespeople to the event. They're not going to have to build the exhibition booth. They're not going to have to, print loads of handouts to put on seats at the conference that people just chuck on the floor anyway. Now in a virtual event, if you're a sponsor, you can say, well, I want my 30-second intro video playing before every session. I'd like the email. I'd like everyone to have to tick a box to say they're happy for me to have their email addresses so I can send every single person who attends a message. I'd like my 3 minutes for me speaking to camera in the middle of this event. They can get loads more value. So we're likely not to be going back from that. And the last thing in terms of hybrid blended events is I can see a sort of possibly a business emerging where people might pay for a ticket to the live event, but that will be a really big, exclusive, like leadership level luxury thing. And you pay, I don't know what, $3,000 for a ticket. And if you're senior in a business, you go, but you also get 10 virtual tickets for your team for that price.
Right.
And they tune in virtually.
Right.
So there's 30 people in a room, but it's being broadcast to 30,000 people, potentially. Yeah. I can easily see that emerging as a model, possibly.
That I can see. I mean, I can see it already. The rules that are in place, people break. I mean, it's amazing how the lockdown occurred, and pretty much en masse, everyone obeyed, everywhere. There was a sensibility. Of course, some people didn't, but overall, everyone obeyed. It was insane. It was amazing. I don't think that's going to happen again. I think there's been too many other things that have come. There's too many conflicting opinions and changes, and we'll obviously see what happens as they open up business. And the damage of. Ultimately, you want to protect everyone from disease and spread. Lock them down forever. Put them in a. We could all exist like this forever. We'd all go mad, but we could, theoretically. And you worry about the other damages, because we need to touch, we need to hug, we need those things. Yeah. That's just the essence of humanity.
Yeah, definitely, and if it went on forever and ever, I mean, young people wouldn't put up with it for much. I mean, there would eventually be a rhetoric, it's sort of occurring already.
It's already
occurring, I mean, we're doing all this to save the over 80s. Well, they've had an amazing life. I mean, in the UK, they've had nationalised healthcare for free of charge forever. They've got their own lovely houses. I mean, we've already faced having to work all of our lives and not owning property. So why should we put up with this as well? I mean, that would happen. I think, it's probably culturally, it's very different in the UK to the States, because my sense generally is people in the States have quite a different relationship to their government anyway, certainly to the federal government anyway. There's quite a combative.
Yeah.
Who are you to tell me what to do? And that doesn't exist, or certainly doesn't exist so much in the UK. We have a much more. We still, despite everything in the last few years, we still take our government quite seriously. And I think possibly psychologically, it's a little bit like sort of giving up alcohol or going on a diet. I think it's probably one of those things where it's just easier to go full in and not have to make any decisions. If you put someone on a diet and you say you're only allowed to eat once per day at exactly 6 o'clock for 5 minutes, and that's it, that's your diet. That's sort of quite an easy diet for many people to follow because there's no decisions to make. Mm-hmm. I just do it. It's the same as teetotal. People go teetotal because I just don't drink alcohol. That's it. You don't have to juggle that. Oh, I've had 2 glasses. Is that too much? And I think what we're seeing when we went into full lockdown, there was no reason to break the lockdown because there was nothing to break it for. There's no pubs to go to. There's no people to meet. So why would you break lockdown really, unless you were a bit of an idiot? So I think if a government imposed full lockdown, strangely, that's still easier for everyone to adhere to and still easier to enforce. It's this weird thing of, and we're going to see it, in the UK yesterday, the government announced the pubs can sort of open under really onerous circumstances. So what we're going to see yet another divide in the nation, with some people saying, I need my pint, I deserve it, and I don't blame them, I'm going to the pub. And other people saying, you're killing old people by going to the pub, don't you? We're going to see that divide. And so it's going to be much more about values than about science, the conversation, I think.
Yeah, restaurants have opened here. And I went to one the other day. I think I've been twice since they've loosened up. And it wasn't a particularly pleasant experience.
No.
A waiter with a mask who was running around doing the job of 3 waiters because they'd only hired him and one chef, and the quality of the food was terrible. And you go into a coffee shop, but you can't use a toilet. And then another restaurant I went to, which was actually quite good to go into, but they take a virtual laser temperature.
Oh, yeah.
So they take your temperature, you're okay, you come in with a mask, you get shown to your table. This was kind of had a bar, and it was sort of American fare. And then you go to your table, then you go up to the bar with your mask, and you order your meal and your drink, which is provided to you in horrible plastic cups. And then you go and sit at your place, but then you take your mask off, and they deliver your food and your drink.
Right, yeah.
And so what's really I don't know. And it was actually a relief. It was like, oh my God, this is wonderful. And I went back into a Best Buy, which is equivalent to say a Dixon's in the UK.
Yeah.
Today actually, because previous to that it's been curbside only and online. And it was just wonderful to have a wander around a shop. But we have to wear masks in shops, and I don't think they do in the UK. So it's interesting that it doesn't seem that governments and countries are really care what other countries are doing. They'll do it whichever way they see fit. And
I can see the argument for that because, different countries have different cultures and there are different relationships. And the full lockdown that Spain and Italy had, you can only do that in countries where there's real respect for the police, where the police have real authority, and also where you have identity cards. Is how else do you enforce it? You just couldn't do that in the UK. No one would put up with it.
Yeah.
But also you can't enforce it because it's not only is it not the law that you have to carry any form of identity, it's very deep in British culture that unless, we have a very un-European view of the law. The European view of the law is most things are prohibited unless the law says you can do it. Whereas British culture is very much anything is prohibited, anything is possible unless the law specifically prohibits it. And I think that's quite deep in our DNA as British people. So I sort of see the argument why governments would have different approaches to managing crowd behaviour, and we're still too early to know which governments have got it right and which have got it wrong, aren't we?
Yeah. So,
Mr. Roffman, I have to go in a second.
Absolutely. I was just going to wrap up.
Because I'm very busy and important.
Yes. Yes. Moving forward, do you think you're going to be performing live again anytime soon?
No, not anytime soon. And to be honest, I think I would, being totally honest about it, it would sort of feel like a lot of effort now to go and do a live event, to be honest.
Right.
I mean, there's an effort to presenting things online. I mean, it's a different kind of effort. And in many ways, like so many people, I've had to become a sort of multimedia sound and lighting expert as much as a presenting expert. And I think possibly, and again, it's all guesses, none of us have got a crystal ball. I think possibly what will happen is different pricing will emerge. And so I think for me as a speaker, my pricing will probably end up being something like, you can have me for X amount of money. And if you really want me to put shoes on and get on a train or get on a plane, you can have me for X amount of money plus a lot more money.
Right. Well, that will convince you.
Of course it would convince me. And I love traveling. I yearn to travel again. I yearn to travel. I mean, that thing you said about the restaurants really reminded me, because I have booked several flights for later in the year, partly because I needed to use up a really annoying BA voucher. And so I booked loads of flights, hoping they cancel half of those flights so that I get the cash back on the refunds this time. But to try and spend the voucher quickly, I booked them all business class. And I did say on the phone to the person, what's traveling going to be like? And she said, well, masks at all time, including on the plane, except when we serve food and drink, which they do in business class. I mean, seems totally insane to me. But it did make flying seem like a very, very unappealing option.
Yeah.
However, before 9/11, none of us had to put all our liquids in a little plastic bag. And we all thought that was going to be 3 months inconvenience, and we've just got used to it. We've just got used to the fact that security is a miserable experience at airports.
And a lot of things,
we're all better off.
Yeah, a lot of things have been reduced, and there's still lingering effects of that. But things have changed, and things will constantly change. So I think, I think there's a positive.
We'll get used to it. I think we'll see a little sort of boost as we come out of lockdown. It'll feel possibly for a little while like, things are getting back to normal and businesses are managing again. And then my slightly dire prediction is that will fade. I'm talking specifically about the UK, which is obviously the country I know best.
Yeah.
Later in the year, partly because we're a country so affected by the weather. So there are many businesses at the moment, we're in June at the moment, where they can put some tables outside, they can serve out of a window. Mm-hmm. That's all going to work. July, August, we're going to see. I can't see how we're not going to go into massive redundancies later in the year as the government funding dries up. So we're going to see the effect of that. We're going to see the effect of the weather. And also all these businesses that are trying to run a normal level of service, but exactly as you say, with massively reduced clientele, a massively reduced service, and so much of the experience that won't be there anymore. So people are probably... I'm afraid I'm a bit pessimistic about some of this, because people are going to go to restaurants and think, oh, well, I tried that, but actually it wasn't as much fun as having a picnic in the park. It was a pretty miserable... And half of going to a restaurant is showing off to other people and flirting with the table next to you, and sometimes, getting wildly drunk and having a night where you've danced with the bar staff. I'm exaggerating a bit, but it's so much part of that experience, isn't it?
Atmosphere and interaction, personal interaction, the food, the smell, the sounds, the going there, the leaving, how do I get home?
Yes.
All of that.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think things will start. I think we'll see our way out of this relatively soon. I mean, I predicted from the very get-go, September, we wouldn't see anything going on. And I think in some ways we're doing better than that. The year's a bit of a write-off in that respect, but there's a lot to be taken from it. And one thing you said when I came to one of your talks online right at the beginning was, think about May or March. I think it was March 2021, looking back at March 2020. And are you going to look back and say, that was the moment when I actually did that thing that allowed me to get to March 2021. And actually, wow, it's not too bad. We're still there.
Absolutely. And when I say I'm a little bit pessimistic about it, by the way, I'm not talking about the long term. We'll see our way through this, and businesses will reconfigure, and restaurants will find another way to deliver that experience. Eventually. I'm talking about the next 1 to 5 years. I think we're headed for some quite rough times, and some people will do brilliantly and well out of it. Of course they will. They're always winners.
Well, on that bombshell, I'm going to thank you for taking your early morning with me in my late night.
My pleasure.
It's been lovely as ever to see you and have a chat. Always
great.
Enjoyable.
Yeah, equally, likewise.
And if people want to hear more about you, and where do they go?
Oh, if you type Lee Warren speaker into Google, you will find me in one of my various digital hideouts.
Lee Warren speaker. And I definitely recommend getting hold of your book. There we are. Busy Person's Guide to Great Presenting. The award-winning book. It's fab and actually really useful, and it's an easy read, and
that's the award.
There's the. It's a quick read actually. It's an easy read, and there's a lot of things I think in a lot of different areas of industry people will pick up. It's not just about presenting per se. I think there's a lot to take from it. So thanks a lot, Lee.
Great, my pleasure. Lovely to chat to you as always, Paul.
Alrighty, you take care.
Bye.
Bye.